If you're into ghost horror stories that involve subtle presences, places marked by the past, and messages that travel through time, then stick around. Every account in this video brings a different kind of haunting. Some will scare you, others will hit you deep. Like in the story you're about to hear, where a school built over an old cemetery starts revealing signs from the other side, including a little girl who might have just been waiting for someone to finally see her. But before we dive into the story, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of our terrifying stories. And tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. The hallway of that school always had a strange smell, a mix of chalk, waxed wood, and something else. Something not of the living. I had worked there for years, and everyone knew the stories. The school had been built on top of an old pioneer cemetery, and no, it wasn't an urban legend. There were documents, names of people buried there who had never been properly removed. But we all pretended it didn't matter because what else could we do? Close the school. Then one day, Sister Mary saw something she couldn't ignore. She was in the library, organizing some books, when she looked up and saw a teenager standing behind Sister Catherine. But Sister Catherine was alone. The boy was there, clear as day, wearing an old uniform, the kind no one had worn for decades. When Sister Mary blinked, he vanished. After that, strange events started popping up. Objects would disappear and reappear in impossible places. Students complained about voices whispering in their ears when no one was around. And me. I started seeing things too. Not shadows, not figures. People. People who shouldn't have been there. The administration called a priest, held a protection ceremony, and dedicated the school to the Virgin Mary. For a while, things were quiet. We even breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was over. But ghosts don't work like that, do they? They don't follow rules or take orders. They linger. It was one afternoon after classes had ended that I saw the girl. I was tidying up the third-grade classroom, picking up some forgotten notebooks, when I felt that chill on the back of my neck. The kind that has no explanation, the kind that comes from within. I turned slowly, and there she was. A little girl, no older than 8, crouched under the desks. She wore a brown dress, scuffed boots, and her blonde hair was tousled, as if she had been running through a field before appearing there. My heart stopped, not out of fear, but out of recognition. I knew in that moment that she wasn't alive, but she didn't scare me either. She just looked at me with big, sad eyes, as if she were waiting for something. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Are you lost?" She didn't answer. She just kept staring. Then I slowly crouched down to her level. "Do you want to play?" I asked, not even knowing why I was offering that. That's when she smiled. A small, almost shy smile. And then, poof, she disappeared. Not in the blink of an eye, not in a puff of smoke. It was as if the air around her had swallowed her whole slowly, until nothing was left. I stayed there, kneeling on the floor, my fingers trembling. I knew it wasn't my imagination. I knew she was real in her own way, and the worst part? I had the feeling she hadn't really gone away. She was still nearby, just waiting. That night I told my husband. He looked at me as if I had gone crazy, but I knew what I had seen. And when my son, the next day, came home crying because a scary girl had appeared out of nowhere in the school hallway and frightened him, well, then there was no denying it. Something or someone was in that school, and she wasn't alone. My son, Lucas, had never been a scaredy cat, but that day he came running to me, his eyes filled with tears, clinging to my leg as if something was about to pull him back into the hallway. "There was a girl there, Mom," he cried. "She was all dirty and told me to come with her." My blood ran cold. It was the same girl, the one in the brown dress. I knelt in front of him, holding his face firmly. "Lucas, listen to me. She won't hurt you, okay? She's just lost." But how could I explain to a child that the girl wasn't really a girl? That night I decided I would try to talk to her again. If she had appeared to me and to Lucas, it was for a reason. Ghosts don't just show up for no reason, right? Either they want help or they're stuck in something. And that girl, she didn't seem evil, just sad. I went back to the school after hours, alone. The place felt different at night. The silence was heavy, as if the building had secrets hidden in its walls. I walked to the classroom where I had first seen her. The lights were off. Only the moonlight streamed through the windows, casting blue streaks on the floor. I took a deep breath. "Hi, I'm back," I said softly. Nothing. Then I felt it. That chill from before, the shiver that wasn't from the wind. And when I looked at the corner of the room, there she was. This time she wasn't crouching. She was standing, leaning against the wall, her arms crossed, as if she had been waiting. "Do you have a name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer, but her lips moved, as if she were trying to speak, yet no sound came out. "Do you need help?" She nodded slowly, then pointed to the floor. I looked where she indicated, but there was nothing. Just the old wooden floor. "What's there?" She made a gesture as if she were digging. Then she looked at me again, and this time, I swear I saw tears in her eyes. That's when I understood. The next day, I went to the administration office and asked to see the school's old records. The secretary thought it was strange, but I insisted. After much searching, I found it, a document talking about when the school was built, and there in a corner a small note. During the excavations, unidentified remains were found, reburied on site after blessing. My heart raced. The girl, she was down there. I picked up my son after school and told him, "Lucas, the girl you saw, her name is Estella." I don't know how I knew the name, but it came naturally. "And she doesn't want to scare you. She just wants us to find where she is." He looked at me seriously, as if he understood more than I expected. "Can we help her, Mom?" I smiled. "We'll try." That weekend, we returned to the school with flowers, daisies, the simplest I could find. We went to the courtyard where the document said the remains had been buried. There was no headstone, no marking, just grass. We knelt and placed the flowers on the ground. "Estella," I said, "we brought these for you." The wind stopped right then, and for a second I felt it. Something had changed, as if the air had become lighter. That's when Lucas smiled and pointed. "Look, Mom." Among the flowers, one of them, just one, swayed alone, as if someone had passed their hand over it. And I knew. She had heard us. After that day, Estella started appearing more often, not like before, scaring or vanishing quickly. She would stay there in the corners of the room, at the end of the hallway, always in that brown dress with her big eyes. But there was something different about her now. Less sadness, more curiosity. Lucas stopped being afraid. Sometimes I would see him talking to himself in the classroom after school, and I knew who he was talking to. Once he came to show me a drawing he had made. A blonde girl, smiling, surrounded by flowers. "She liked it, Mom," he said, all proud. But I knew this couldn't go on forever. Estella didn't belong in this world. She was stuck, and we had to help her move on for good. I sought out a medium I knew from town, a woman everyone said had the gift. I explained everything, and she didn't even seem surprised. "Children are like that," she said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. They stay where they died, especially if it was before their time. The woman came to the school one night with candles, incense, and an old Bible. We went to the courtyard, where the flowers we had left were still there, wilted now, but still there. The medium closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to pray. I held Lucas's hand, and we stood in silence. The wind began to blow again, but this time it was stronger, colder. The candles flickered, and for a second I swore I heard laughter. Not scary, not malicious, but light, like a child playing. That's when I saw her, Estella. Not in the corner, not hiding. She was right in the middle of the courtyard, illuminated by the moonlight, clearer than I had ever seen her. She looked at me, at Lucas, and then she waved. The medium opened her eyes and smiled. "She's ready," she said. "Ready for what?" Lucas asked, squeezing my hand. "To go to a better place, my child." We stood there, watching as the medium finished her prayers. And then, slowly, Estella began to disappear. Not in that scary way from before. This time it was as if she were dissolving into the light, becoming brighter until her outline was no longer distinguishable. And then, she was gone. The wind stopped, the candles went out, and the courtyard fell silent again. Lucas looked at me. "Is she gone?" I nodded. "I think so, son." He was quiet for a second, then said, "It's okay. She needed to go." In the days that followed, the school felt different. The heavy air was gone, the whispers stopped. Even the other teachers commented that the place seemed more light. But sometimes, when I'm alone tidying up the classroom at the end of the day, I still feel that little chill on the back of my neck. And I smile, because I know it might just be the wind, or it might be Estella, taking one last peek before moving on. And I truly hope that wherever she is now, she has finally found a place to play. Creepy, right? What did you think of the story? On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate it? Let me know down in the comments. Not every spirit means harm, but some places seem to absorb the pain of those who've passed through. Like in the next case, where an empty building still carries the weight of a tragedy no one could ever forget. I'll never forget the day my dad came home with a look in his eyes I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't fear, it wasn't exhaustion. It was as if he had seen something that shouldn't exist. He dropped his keys on the table, looked at me, and let out a deep sigh before saying, "Son, there's something wrong with that new building." It all started when he got a contract to work on the renovation of an old building downtown. A big place, one of those that used to be beautiful but had been worn down by time. Broken windows, peeling walls, and a silence that hung heavy like an old blanket. The owner wanted to revitalize the place, turn it into something useful again. My dad, a mason with over 20 years of experience, agreed right away. Work is work, right? On the first day, he went alone, as usual. He arrived early, opened the rusty padlock on the main gate, and went in. The smell of mold and dust was strong, but nothing he wasn't used to. The problem started when he began walking through the corridors. The building was empty, but not really empty. You know that feeling when you sense someone watching you, even when there's no one around? Well, my dad said that suddenly the back of his neck started to burn, as if a pair of eyes were glued to him. He turned quickly, but nothing. Just the dark corridor and the old doors all closed. He tried to ignore it. After all, an old man doesn't have time for nonsense. He continued working, marking where the walls needed to be torn down, where the floor needed to be replaced. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It got worse when he went to lock up the building at the end of the day. He bent down to pick up the gate chain, and that's when he heard it. A sigh, low but clear, right behind him. My dad isn't a man who scares easily, but at that moment, he said his blood ran cold. He turned again and again. Nothing. Just the wind hitting a broken window up high. He got out of there fast, but not without giving the building one last look. And that's when he swore he saw something moving on the top floor. A shadow. A tall, thin thing that disappeared as soon as he blinked. The next day, he called Jack, his longtime friend, to work with him. 2 are better than 1, especially when the place seems to dislike visitors. Jack arrived skeptical, as always. "Man, you're going crazy. Old buildings make noise, it's normal." But my dad insisted. They decided to leave the central door open just in case. You never know, right? The work went smoothly until mid-afternoon. That's when Jack suddenly stopped, looked at my dad, and asked, "Did you hear that?" My dad didn't need to answer because they both heard it at the same time. Something dragging on the floor above. Slowly, as if someone was walking carefully, trying not to be noticed. They went up together, each with a piece of iron in hand, just in case. The second floor was intact, full of debris and dust. Nothing out of place. But at the back of the corridor, a door was open. The only open door in the entire building, and on the floor in front of it, a strange mark. As if someone had dragged a rope across the dusty floor. That's when Jack, always the skeptic, turned pale. "Dude, this place has a really bad energy." My dad silently agreed. They didn't need to speak to know that something in that place didn't want them there. On their way out, they chatted with an old man who lived on the street behind the building. The man looked at them with a wry smile and said, "Ah, you're working in the Hanged Man's building, huh?" My dad and Jack exchanged glances. "Hanged Man?" The old man took a drag on his cigarette before continuing. "Yeah, a few years back a guy hanged himself in there, on the top floor. They say he still walks around, especially when people mess with his stuff." And then my dad understood what he had seen in that window, and what he had heard behind him. That conversation with the old man echoed in my dad's head for the rest of the day. Hanged. The word weighed like a stone. Jack, who until then had been the skeptic of the duo, was now quiet, his eyes fixed on the building as if expecting to see something in the windows. But the sun was still high, and daylight always helps keep those thoughts at bay. They went back to work, but this time, neither of them wanted to be alone in separate rooms. My dad said the silence between them was different. It wasn't the silence of people concentrating on their work. It was the silence of people listening, waiting. Every creak of the old wood, every gust of wind through the broken windows, everything seemed like a sign. On the third day, they decided to bring a powerful flashlight and a radio, just to lighten the mood. The old music playing softly helped a little, but not for long. Around noon, the radio started to hiss out of nowhere, as if someone had been tuning the dial. Jack tapped it, but instead of improving, it got worse, until, amidst the noise, they heard it. A voice, low, hoarse, almost whispering. Neither of them could understand what it was saying, but one thing was certain. That didn't come from the radio. That's when the back door slammed. There wasn't enough wind to justify it. There was nothing to justify it. Just bang. Sharp, as if someone had punched the wood. My dad said his heart jumped into his throat. Jack, who had always been the tough guy, almost dropped his hammer. They looked at each other, and without saying a word, agreed on one thing. That's enough for today. But the building wasn't going to let them leave so easily. As they gathered their tools, my dad heard it again. That same sigh, this time closer. He turned slowly, gripping the handle of the sledgehammer tightly, and looked into the darkest corner of the room. Nothing, just dust and shadows. But then, movement. Something shifted in the dark, as if a part of the darkness had detached itself from the wall. Jack didn't notice. He was already almost at the door, calling my dad to leave. My dad swallowed hard, took another step back, and that's when he felt it. Cold. A cold that made no sense in that stuffy place. A cold that came out of nowhere and enveloped him, as if an icy hand had been run down his back. He didn't wait to see more. He turned and almost ran out, closing the gate behind him with a noise that echoed through the empty street. That night, at home, my dad could barely sleep. He lay there looking at the ceiling, reliving every second inside that building. The sigh, the voice, the slamming door, and that thing in the dark. The next day, he and Jack went back, not because they wanted to, but because the work needed to be finished. This time, however, they entered with a plan. No staying late, no separating, and most importantly, no ignoring the signs. But the building had a plan too, and this time it wasn't going to just whisper. It was going to show who really lived there. The last time my dad and Jack entered that building, the air was already different, heavier, as if the walls were holding their breath. They worked quickly, not saying much, just exchanging glances from time to time. Until, late in the afternoon, Jack suddenly stopped and pointed to the floor. "Look at this." In the middle of the dust, there were footprints, not theirs. They were wearing boots, and these marks were from bare feet. Thin, elongated, as if someone had been walking on their tiptoes, and they weren't going away. They were coming towards them. My dad felt his stomach turn. He followed the trail with his eyes to a slightly open door at the end of the corridor. The same door that had slammed shut by itself the day before. This time it was half open, as if someone had just left. Jack gripped the sledgehammer tighter. "Let's take a look." My dad didn't want to, but he knew that if they didn't face it now, they would never have the courage to return. They entered slowly, the flashlight trembling in Jack's hand. The room was small, empty, just a bunch of old boxes and cobwebs. But in the center, hanging from the ceiling, there was a rope. Old, thick, tied in a knot that looked recent. And then the cold returned. This time it came with force. The air became icy to the point where their breath turned to mist. The flashlight flickered, and in the darkness that followed, they heard it. A creak. Slow. Metallic. As if something heavy was swaying. When the light returned, the rope was moving, gently, back and forth. And beneath it, on the dusty floor, there was a shadow. An elongated silhouette, with a broken neck, that didn't belong to either of them. Jack didn't wait. He screamed and ran out, and my dad followed, almost tripping over his own feet. They didn't stop until they were outside, under the sun, with the gate locked behind them. The work was completed the following week, but they never entered that building alone again. They didn't have to. The owner, frightened by their accounts, hired more people to help. My dad never talked much about what happened inside, but sometimes when the night is very quiet, I see him looking into nothing, as if he's listening to something no one else can hear. And I wonder if, somewhere, in an empty room with a rope swaying by itself, someone is still waiting for more visitors. Terrifying, isn't it? Even the biggest skeptics start to waver when they feel something they just can't explain. And sometimes the place that holds that presence isn't some abandoned building, but a museum open to the public, filled with stories, like the one you're about to hear. But before we jump into the next story, if you've made it this far, it probably means you're enjoying our content. So go ahead and hit that like button to let YouTube know you want more stories like this, and so you never miss another horror video. Las Vegas is a place that never sleeps, but some things there, well, they never died. And I'm going to tell you something that happened to me and my husband, Mark, on one of those outings that you think will just be fun, but end up turning into a nightmare. We had heard about the haunted museum on the Strip, one of those places full of horror stories, cursed objects, and of course the famous ghosts that supposedly haunted the corridors. Mark is a skeptic, the kind who laughs at ghost stories, but I've always been a bit wary. You know that feeling that someone is watching you, even when there's no one there? Well, that's it. When we got there, the museum seemed normal. Dark paint, low lights, that air of mystery from a horror movie. The attendant, a girl with a somewhat forced smile, offered the VIP upgrade, access to the basement where the heavier items were kept. Mark didn't think twice. "It'll be fun," he said. I should have listened to the chill in my stomach that I felt at that moment. The basement was freezing. Not that normal cold from air conditioning, but something that stuck to your skin, as if the place were breathing against us. The walls were narrow, full of old photos, some with blurred faces, others with eyes that seemed to follow us. I tried to focus on the guide's explanations, but one thing caught my attention: a figure in the corner of my eye. Just a shadow, I thought, until I looked at Mark. Behind him, leaning against the wall, there was a figure, all in black with a hood covering its face, but I knew it was looking at me. My heart stopped. The air left my lungs as if someone had squeezed my chest. "Mark," I whispered. But when he turned, there was nothing there. Just emptiness. The guide continued talking, as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't concentrate. That place had something wrong. A heavy energy, as if we weren't welcome. And then, again, that figure. This time closer, almost next to Mark. I didn't think, I just ran. I climbed the stairs as if something were chasing me, my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode. When Mark caught up with me upstairs, he was confused. "What happened?" he asked. I couldn't explain. How do you say that you've seen something that shouldn't exist? Something that I knew wasn't just my imagination. We left the museum right away, but that image, that hooded figure, wouldn't leave my mind. In the car, Mark tried to joke. "I think the museum worked too well on you," he laughed. But I couldn't laugh. Because one thing was certain. Someone, or something, in that basement had seen me, and I had the terrible feeling that it wasn't over. We didn't talk much about it that night. Mark thought I had been scared by the atmosphere, maybe even by my own mind. But I knew. Some things you feel even when you can't explain them. And I felt that figure. It was still there, waiting. And the worst, I had no idea what it wanted. Months had passed since that night at the museum, But the memory of that hooded figure still haunted me. Nightmares that chill down my spine when I closed my eyes. I couldn't forget. Mark, of course, still insisted it was just my imagination. Dark place, low lights, the mind plays tricks, he would say. But I knew what I had seen. Then one random weekend he dropped the bomb. We're going back there. It wasn't a question, it was a challenge. He wanted to prove that I had made it all up, that there was nothing supernatural in that basement. And even with my stomach in knots, I agreed. Because deep down, a part of me needed to know. Had I really gone crazy? This time the museum seemed different. More ordinary. The lights were a bit brighter. The air didn't have that suffocating weight. Even the attendant was different. An older woman, smiling, who didn't even seem to remember the incident from last time. Mark paid for the VIP tickets again, and I swallowed hard. The basement. We went down the stairs, and I braced myself for the worst. But nothing. No chill down my neck, no figure in the corners. Just the same narrow basement, the same old photos, the same guide telling stories of cursed objects. Mark looked at me with a victorious smile. See? No ghosts. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But something still didn't add up. Why was everything normal this time? Where was that figure? And why, the more I looked at the photos on the walls, the more I felt that something was wrong. That's when I saw it. In the last photo in the corridor, a faded image of a group of people in old-fashioned clothes. Everyone was smiling. Everyone, except one. In the corner, almost hidden, a hooded man. Invisible face. Rigid posture. Exactly like the figure I had seen behind Mark. My fingers trembled as I pointed. You see this?" I asked the guide, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at the photo, then at me, and frowned. "This photo has always been here. It's of the old owner of the building. They say he had a habit of dressing like that. They say." The word echoed in my head. Because I knew that tone. The tone of someone who doesn't want to talk much. The tone of someone who knows more than they're saying. Mark pulled me by the arm. "Enough, see? It's just an old photo. You're looking for things where there aren't any." But I couldn't take my eyes off that image, because now I was sure that thing existed. And if the museum knew about it, what else were they hiding? On the way back home, I didn't say anything. Mark tried to make conversation, but I could only think about that photo. Why had the guide been so uncomfortable? Why was the hooded man the only one not smiling? It was only when we got home that I decided. "We need to research this museum," I said, grabbing the laptop. Mark sighed but sat beside me. And when we started typing, wow, the stories came up like a tsunami. Reports of visitors who swore they saw shadows moving on their own. Of people who got sick in the basement, saying they felt invisible hands pulling them. And worse, a urban legend about a hooded man who appeared to those who entered the basement after midnight. Mark was quiet for a long time, until he finally spoke. Okay, maybe there is something strange there. It was the first time he had admitted it, and that, more than anything, scared me. Because if even Mark, the biggest skeptic in the world, was starting to believe, what the hell had we seen in that basement? After that research, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark hood, the rigid posture of the figure in the photo. Mark tried to calm me down, but even he was different. Quieter, more thoughtful. We didn't talk about the museum, but it was there, between us, like a third person in the relationship. One night I woke up to a noise. Something hitting the window. When I got up, I almost screamed. Outside, on the empty street, a hooded silhouette standing under the streetlight. No, it's not possible. My heart raced, but when I blinked, the figure was gone. Had I imagined it? The next day, I decided I needed answers. I told Mark, I want to go back there one last time. This time, he didn't argue. He just looked at me and agreed. I think we both already knew. This wasn't going to end until we faced it head-on. We arrived at the museum near closing time. This time, there was no one at the reception, just a note. Closed for maintenance. But the door was unlocked. An invitation? A trap? It didn't matter. We went in. The museum was empty, silent. The main lights were off. Only some weak lamps lit the corridors. We went down to the basement and the air became heavy again, that cold that seemed to come from within the bones. This time, not even Mark doubted. We knew. Something was waiting. At the back of the basement where the last photo was, there was a door I didn't remember seeing before. Small, made of old wood, with a strange symbol scratched on the surface. Mark looked at me and I saw the fear in his eyes, but we had come too far to turn back. He opened the door. Inside there was a tiny room with a single chair in the center, and sitting in it, the hooded figure. This time it didn't disappear. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't an illusion. It was physical, real, with its hands resting on its lap as if it had been waiting for us for years. I froze. Even Mark, who always had a joke ready, was speechless. Then, the figure moved. Slowly, it raised its hands and pulled the hood back. There was no face, just darkness. A deep void where a face should have been. And then it spoke. The voice didn't come from it. It came from everything, from the walls, from the floor, from the air. A hoarse voice, as if it had been forgotten for centuries. "You came back." Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me back, but the door behind us slammed shut on its own. There was no way out. The figure stood up, and I felt the purest terror of my life. It wasn't just fear. It was certainty. Certainty that we shouldn't have come back. Certainty that this thing wasn't a ghost. It was something worse, something that had been placed there. "No one escapes after the third visit," the voice whispered. That's when the lights went out. I don't know how we got out of there. I just remember running, stumbling up the stairs, screaming until my throat was raw. When we finally got outside, the museum was locked again, as if nothing had happened. In the car, we didn't say a word. We didn't need to. Both of us knew what had happened, what almost happened. We never went back to that museum, not even close. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still feel that chill, that weight, as if something were watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. Because now I know the truth. Some doors should not be opened. And some things, well, they don't like to be forgotten. And the worst? They remember who disturbed them. So bizarre. What did you think of that one? Drop your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I want to hear your take. Dad, Grandpa said he's okay now. He went back to Texas. Those words froze the air in the room. I was on the couch with my brother Jake watching some random game on TV when my daughter, Emily, dropped that bombshell out of nowhere. She didn't even look at us. She just kept drawing on the floor as if she were commenting on the weather. But that sentence didn't make sense. Jake almost spilled his beer. I swallowed hard, feeling a chill run up my spine. "Emily, sweetheart, which grandpa are you talking about?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. She looked up at me as if I had asked a silly question. "Your grandpa, duh. The man with the mustache who came here yesterday. He said you should stop worrying." My stomach turned. My grandfather, the only grandpa I had, died 10 years before Emily was born. And yes, he had a mustache. One of those thick old cowboy mustaches. But how on earth did she know that? I had never shown her his pictures. I hadn't talked much about him. Especially because our family history wasn't the lightest. Jake stared at me, his eyes wide. "Dude," was all he could say. I stood up and slowly approached Emily, as if she were a scared animal. "Emmy, tell me exactly, what did this grandpa look like?" She shrugged. "He was there in the hallway. He wore a hat and a plaid shirt. He smiled at me and said you'd like to know he's okay. Then he said he went back to Texas and that it doesn't hurt anymore." It doesn't hurt anymore. That part got to me. My grandfather spent his last years suffering from cancer. It was a slow, painful death. And Texas, damn, Texas was where he was born, in 1920. He only left there in 1939 when he came to Ohio. But he never went back, not even to visit. He always said that land brought too many ghosts for him. I sat down on the floor near Emily, trying not to seem desperate. Did he say anything else?" She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No, he just disappeared. Disappeared. As if it were normal. as if ghosts appeared in the hallway every day. Jake groaned from the couch, incredulous. You thinking what I'm thinking? I knew what he meant. We grew up hearing ghost stories in the family. Our great-grandfather was a tough man, the kind who left marks, and my grandfather, before he died, always said that Texas held things he didn't want to relive, but he went back there. Why? Emily went back to drawing, totally calm, as if she hadn't just blown up my sense of reality. I looked at the empty hallway, that chill on the back of my neck insisting someone, or something, had been there. And if it was indeed my grandfather, what did he mean by that? I couldn't get it out of my head. Went back to Texas. It doesn't hurt anymore. Why the hell would my grandfather appear now after all this time to give such a message? And why to Emily? She never even knew him. Unless he wanted it to be through her. Jake stayed a few more minutes and then left, a bit awkwardly, saying he had to wake up early. But I knew he was scared. We always joked about ghost stuff until that day. Now he had the same expression as when we were kids and heard noises in Grandma's attic. After he left, I sat with Emily on her bed, trying to ask more questions without seeming like a lunatic. This grandpa, did he say anything about why he went back to Texas? She shrugged. No, just that he was happy. Happy. That word hurt. My grandfather wasn't a happy man. Fights, drinking, regrets. His life was heavy. I looked at the dark room, imagining if he was still there, invisible, listening to us. Did he seem angry or sad? Emily shook her head. No, he was smiling, and he did this. She raised her hand and waved, as if saying goodbye. That gave me a chill, a wave, as if he were leaving for good. I left Emily to sleep and went to the living room, calling the only guy who might know something, my Uncle Carl, my grandfather's younger brother. He still lived in Texas, on a ranch near where the family had lived in the 1920s. The phone rang about 5 times before he answered, his voice hoarse from sleep. Carl, it's Matt. Sorry to wake you, but something strange happened today. I told him everything, from what Emily had said to the detail about Texas. On the other end of the line, the silence was so heavy I thought the call had dropped. Then he responded slowly. Matt, you know your grandpa never wanted to go back to Texas, right? I knew. Everyone knew. Yeah, but he said he went back. And I'm trying to understand what that means. Carl took a deep breath. Look, there's something your grandpa never told anyone. Only me, once, when he was drunk. Back in Texas, before we came to Ohio. Something bad happened. Something he carried his whole life. I pressed the phone against my ear. What thing? He never told me exactly. Just that there was a place, an old house on the outskirts of the family property. He went in there once, and when he came out, he was never the same. I felt that chill again, rising like a trail of icy fingers on the back of my neck. Are you saying that he saw something there? Or did something? Carl's voice was grave. Your grandpa wasn't a saint, Matt, and if he went back to Texas now, it might be that he finally went to face whatever it was he left behind. I looked at the dark hallway, imagining my grandfather there, in a hat and plaid shirt, smiling at Emily. If he had resolved something, why appear here? Why to her? And what if he hadn't come alone? That night was the longest of my life. I stayed awake, listening to every creak in the house, every sound that shouldn't be there. Texas, the old house, the secret my grandfather carried for decades. None of it left my mind. Around 3 a.m., a noise made me jump up. Something dragged in the hallway. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the old floor giving way. It was steps, slow, heavy, different from my grandfather's walk. I grabbed my phone, my trembling hands lighting the way to Emily's room. The door was ajar. When I pushed it, the icy air hit me like a wall. She was sitting on the bed, staring at the darkest corner of the room. Em? My voice came out in a whisper. She turned her face slowly, her eyes glazed. There's another man here, Dad. My blood turned to ice. Where? She pointed to the emptiness behind me. He's by your side. He doesn't have a mustache like Grandpa. He's angry. The phone fell to the floor, the light revealing for a second something that shouldn't exist. A tall, too thin shadow with hunched shoulders, and then as if someone had turned off a switch, the battery died. The last thing I heard was Emily whispering, not to me, but to him. "Grandpa said you can't stay." And then, silence. The room warmed suddenly, as if something had left. Emily blinked, returning to normal, and lay down as if nothing had happened. The next day, I received a call from Carl. He had gone to the old house in Texas, moved by our conversation. "Matt," he said, his voice choked. "There was a marking in the basement, a shallow grave, and a bunch of broken things as if someone had fought there. I didn't need to ask, I already knew. My grandfather hadn't gone back to Texas just to rest. He had gone back to bury the past for good. And apparently, someone didn't like that. There are things we can feel, even if we can't explain them, like a presence that lingers. Just to leave one final message. If you've stayed with me till now, leave a comment saying, 'Listen till the end,' just so I know you felt that connection too. And if these kinds of stories get under your skin, hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more coming that'll send chills down your spine. Oh, and give the video a like too. It doesn't cost anything, and it helps keep this energy flowing between those of us who believe that not everything ends when it seems to be over. There's another video right here with even more intense supernatural stories. Click it and come with me. I'll meet you over there.